Hello, welcome to FX PhD. My name is Matt Leonard and this is class number 7 of mya222 Maya Foundations, and we are still in look development and lighting, of course. So this is the beginning of a 2-week project that we're going to be looking at doing look dev on, firstly, the digital Emily asset that has been around now for a little while. Now obviously that asset has used quite a lot of high-tech information. The whole idea behind the project is to try and create the most photoreal digital human that the team can, and it was originally done using Chaos Group's V-Ray. There was a bunch of light scans done and a whole bunch of things to try and get it to look as realistic as possible. Now what we're simply going to be doing is using some of those assets to do some look development on a human face. The idea is not to try and create an absolutely photoreal human face, though in your time, if you'd like to do that, that obviously is going to be a great thing. Now, instead of using V-Ray, our plan is to use RenderMan. So that's what we're going to be doing. And I'm really going to be using the assets as a building block to looking at how look development can work and some of the things we can do with it. We're obviously going to be focused around this asset, but as I said, we're not going to try and replicate exactly what they've done, because obviously they spent hundreds of man hours trying to do it, and we have half an hour or so per lesson, and we've only got a couple of lessons to do it. So this is really going to be something that you can take away and add to, spend some time in some evenings, some weekends, whatever you want to do, and then it would be great to actually see what you've done and get that posted on the forum so we can see how far you've taken this. So that's the plan for this week and next week. Firstly, what I want to do before we actually start building is show you what assets we've got and some of the conversion that we're going to need to do for working in RenderMan. So firstly, let me just call up some of the files that we've got. So I'm just going to navigate across to my class 7. And let's just put it on this view so you can see clearly. So what we've got going on here is a whole bunch of information. It's obviously a lot. You've had to download a lot for this class, but it's going to be worth it. Firstly, we have in the Maya folder, this is obviously our main working folder. And you can see under scenes, we've got in here a few things that we're going to be using. So I'm going to be starting with this test 2. I'm going to load that, and then I'm going to basically save that out as my clean master that you'll use. Okay, so that's where I'm going to begin. We then have the head model itself, and in here we've got a number of things. We've got the alembic head. Now this doesn't appear to have any UVs on it, so I took the Emily head here, or you can take this Emily head here, depending on which one you want to use. One of them is set up for V-Ray, one of them is just clean, but that does have the correct UVs, so if you want to start from scratch you can do that. We also have the OBJ file as well. Okay, so we've got an alembic, we've got an OBJ, we've got a MA file, which is the Emily head, and then we've got a kind of a version 2. All these have been kind of created and given to us from the Digital Emily project, so none of these have been created by myself. We also have this eye asset shader. Again, this works with the eye. I'm not going to be using this at all. I'm just going to ignore the eyes and really just focus mainly on the skin itself. Okay, so these are some of the things that we've got under the head model. Then we have an open shader language set of shaders for the Emily material. And again, if you want to get into looking at these, you can. I'm just going to completely ignore them, but they came with the downloads, so I thought that you may want to look at them if you've got the time. We've then got the shader setup, and in here we've got some displacements, the RenderMan and the shading additive. These are basically diagrams that show you how this was originally put together. So if I call up the displacement, you can see this is how the team put this together using V-Ray. So you basically got one image in, they've done a scale multiplier, they've brought in a mask, they've times those together, and then that's gone on to the displacement here, and then they have this displacement map here as well. Okay, so they've got all these things that are making up this initial setup here. Then we have the shading additive section. Now this, you can see, again has quite a lot of files. We've got a spec file, a single scatter, a diffuse map, and you can see that we've got a whole bunch of things going on here. So it goes into a subsurface scatter multiply. This goes into a diffuse shader that then gets added together. We've then got the spec map where we've got a 40 and a 60. They're going into FONGs, and then they're being added together, and then they're being assigned into the main shader. Now obviously what this doesn't give us is a specific roadmap for using RenderMan. In fact, it's not even a roadmap for using V-Ray. It's just kind of what they've done maths wise, and it's really left up to you to figure out exactly what they're doing. So if you want to, as I said, try and rebuild this is probably the best way to go. Now what we also have is this RenderMan one here. Now this one is straight from a guy who works over at RenderMan, Pixar, and this is kind of how he did it. And again, we've got this, but it doesn't really show us in a huge amount of detail exactly what he has done. You can see we've got some hue, saturation, and luminance nodes here. We've got some texture read nodes here, where we've got this checker pattern. We've got an invert, which is obviously specifically Maya. We've got a molt and divide node here. So a whole bunch of different things, again, that is being used to try and get the look where this guy wanted to take this through RenderMan. Again, we don't have the final information on this, so these are just some things that you could use if you wanted to. We're going to go with a much simpler approach as we begin to look into this, okay? But they're here if you want them. Also, we have some HDRs, and you can see we've got a mixture of them here, some of which we've used before for other classes, and some that we haven't. And then we have a original texture maps. So you've got a whole bunch of things here. We've got like a texture map mask. We've got a displacement as well, diffuse, micro geo, single scatter, spec, and then some eye bits and pieces here. So there's a lot of stuff here as well. And then we have the texture maps that I'm going to be using, which have been converted into text files, because we need to have text files in order to get them to run properly in RenderMan. Okay, so we're going to look at how we can convert some of these into these text files here. So it's quite a lot of different things. There's even more stuff on the website. If you actually go onto the website, I can show you where some of those things are. So let's just move across to the website so you can see what's available to download. Okay, so a quick Google search for Digital Emily 2 will bring up right at the top this Wiki Human project. This is where you want to go. So you want to click on this, and you can see this are some of the work they've done. You can see these are all the maps they've got. These are the diagrams that I've shown you earlier. These are the light scan images, a whole bunch of things. And here are all the shaders. So you can see the OBJ file that we talked about, the Maya file, the textures, a whole bunch of things in here. Okay, so this is where I've grabbed some of the things that I'm going to be giving to you. Okay, so they're all here. It's free for all. Lots of people are using it. It's fantastic that the group has made this available. It's obviously being worked on by lots of different people, including our own Mike Seymour. Paul DeBeverick is obviously very involved. The whole team at Chaos Group are massively involved. So it's a really good project just to kind of have a look at. Okay, so we've got pretty much all of this. We could follow along with this if we wanted to, but we're going to try and keep it a little more simple for the time being. And again, you've got these reference images that are going to be useful as you're wanting to match that. Okay, so first of all, let's look at how do we actually convert some of these shaders here under the originals. How do we convert these to RenderMan texture files? So let's just minimize Maya and call up our terminal. Okay, so I'm just going to clear this by writing clear. And I'm going to take one of these. I'm just going to go with, say, this diffuse one. And for ease of use, just to try and keep things a little bit simpler, I'm going to go in and I'm going to budge this onto my desktop. Okay, and we can see there it is. Now before we get into this, you may find that when you start doing this, you're going to hit a problem. And the problem could be that you can't actually find the tool to do this. So let me show you where that is first of all. So if I just go into my applications And you can see here all my programs. I'm going to go to Pixar, and then I'm going to go into RenderMan Pro Server 20, and then I'm going to go into bin. And you can see in here we have this file, txmake. This basically will make a RenderMan Pixar texture file or tx file from another file format, such as a TIFF or an EXR or what have you. So this is what we need to use. However, if you don't have the right paths set up, then what you're going to find is that it's not going to be able to find this specific command, and then you're going to hit problems immediately. So let me show you how that can be rectified. So you can see here I have this command touch, this weird kind of character /dot batch profile :open, and then the strange little command again /dot batch profile. Okay, so what this is going to do is this is going to open up this thing called bash profile. Now bash profile basically contains what are known as paths, and paths are used in your operating system, and this is specifically for the Mac, as to where to find like certain tools and commands that exist on your and within your operating system. So when I run this, it's basically going to open up the file .bash_profile in a text editor so we can actually see it. So I'm going to run this. It's going to open up the text editor, and here it is. So this is the file .bash profile, and you can see in here I've got a whole bunch of things. So I've got some variables set, so RenderMan tree, OMS tree, a bunch of other bits and pieces, and one of them, which hopefully you're going to have, is this thing called path equals path $, and you're likely to have something in here. You may not have everything, but you're likely to have some things. Now what you need to do is you need to add this last bit. So it's a colon, and this colon basically is saying I've finished with the first kind of section of directory that I want you to have access to, and I'm now going to give you another folder that you can look at. So you could basically set this path to look in lots of different places. You could say I've got some terminal commands in my RenderMan folder, I've got something in my Arnold folder, I've got a terminal command that I might want to use in a nuke folder or something like that. And so you're basically able to have these multiple colons followed by an entire list of where that folder is in existence, and that will enable you to basically point your operating system to that folder. So when you type things into your command, into your terminal, it can actually find them. Because if you don't have this and you start typing txmake, it's probably going to say command not known, and that's simply because it doesn't know where to go to find that actual command. So you're basically going to add the colon, as I said, and then put the name that goes to that folder. So if we return here, we can see that it is applications Pixar RenderMan Pro Server 20 bin, and bin gets you into where all these are. Okay, so I could run anything from this folder now because I have got this set. Now once you've done that, it's not simply enough to set it up and save it. What you're going to want to do is source it, and the easiest way is simply to log out and then log back in again to your machine. Okay, so that's probably the easiest thing to do. Once you've done that, you will then be able to type txmake, and instead of it coming up with command unknown, so if I was to type, say, Matt Leonard, that's what it says, command not found. Now obviously there's no terminal command called Matt Leonard, but that would be the error you're going to get if it can't find the path to your RenderMan folder. However, having set it up, if I type txmake and press enter, it will find the command and it immediately comes up with this information. Okay, so this is showing me all the arguments and things that I can do. So what I want to do is I want to navigate to my folder, my desktop. Now if you're not used to using terminal, this can be a little bit confusing, but hopefully most people would have used it at some point. The way in which you can clear your screen is you can simply write the word clear, and it clears it. It just basically makes a space and pushes everything off the top of the screen. That's what it does in reality. If I want to see what folder I'm in and what's in that folder, I can write ls, and that's list, and it lists everything in that folder. If I want to see it in a better list, I can write ls -l, and now you can see the owner, you can see the size, etc. So if I wanted to go into, say, desktop stuff, I can say cd des, and then I can do tab, and it will basically finish the directory name. You can press enter, and in fact, because I have a space, this is making it complicated. So let me go back one folder. So to go back a folder, I do cd space -- or -- rather, and now you can see instead of being in my desktop, I'm just kind of in my root. So ls -l. Now you can see everything in kind of the root of my home folder. So if I want to go to my desktop now, cd D, everything is case sensitive, can type desk and tab, and that completes it. ls -l, and now I can see everything. Okay, so that's kind of how you move around. cd ... to move back a folder, and then cd space and the name of the folder to move into that folder. Now, in order to convert these files, and you can see we basically have this one here, what I want to do is I want to say make, or tx make, then I want to say mode, and we need to use what's called periodic. So periodic, and they need to be in single quotes. And then we have the name of the file itself. So I'm going to say 00, and even here I can now press tab, and it will finish the name of that file. Then I can say 00 again, tab again, and this time I'm saying this is the destination file. So I want it to be a text file. So basically what we're saying with this command is we want to make a tx file that is a periodic file. It's coming from a diffuse unlit EXR, and it needs to be converted to a file name called diffuse unlit, but it's going to be a tx file. So I'm going to press enter, and it's going to just sit there for a while thinking about it. Now what will happen in a moment is that the cursor will come back and we'll actually have a file converted. So we just need to give it a minute. Sometimes this can take a few seconds, depending on obviously how fast your machine is and how big the file is. Sometimes it can take quite a long time. The big files that are kind of hundreds and hundreds of meg will definitely take a good few minutes to convert, but hopefully this one will go through reasonably quickly. Okay, so you can see that our file has now come back, or our cursor has come back, ls -l to list, and you can now see that we have our text file here. You can see it's quite a lot bigger than what we had before. So this tx file I can now move. So I'm going to take my tx file. It's 195 megabytes. I'm just going to copy it, and let's go back to my fxphd folder, and I can put it, I'm just going to put it here in the root just so that we know that that's the one we've converted. Okay, so let's load up Maya. Okay, so from here, let's open up our shader setup. Let's just bring this to here so it's all neat. Now, the first thing you want to do is make sure your files, textures are working. Make sure those texture files are working. So we're going to come across to RenderMan RIS, and that's what we're going to be using here. And I'm going to come to Patterns, and I'm going to scoot down to Pixar Texture, and I'm going to load that in. Okay. Now over here you can see we have file name. Let me just budge this up a little bit so you can see when it errors. So I'm going to first of all load in the original EXR. So let's come back to our original texture maps. There's the original EXR. I'm going to click open and view. You can see we're getting just black. Now it goes to white, but we're not actually seeing anything at all. So we're going to change this one to the new TX file we made. And that's that one. We just put in our root and open, and there it is. Immediately it comes up and you can see we've got it working. So that's really what we're wanting to do. We're wanting to make sure that all of our texture files are going to be working. So let me just show you what I've converted. So there's the diffuse unlit. There's the displacement mask. So we do have that one. The displacement itself. We've got our 16K. Now this is absolutely ginormous. This is our micro file. Again, you can see that loading up. We have our single scatter, and finally our spec. You can hear maybe in the background my fan of my computer is beginning to whir into life. These are just because these files are so huge and it's having to do a lot of work in order to get all this working. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this and I'm going to close this down, and I'm going to open up the original file. So I'm just doing an import on this one. I'm coming into my head models and I'm going to go with this Maya scene here, and it comes. Now this, if we go and have a look at it under UV editor, you can see this has been UV'd properly. So this is what we want. This has got the correct UVs on. We've also got the eyes, the eyelids, the eyelashes, everything we need. So this is what we're going to go with. However, if I have a look in here, you can see I've got a ton of stuff that I don't want. So I'm going to come in and I'm just going to delete this, this, and these other bits and pieces. And I'm going to rename this to Emily Head. So this is our master. Okay, it looks like I deleted the eyes by accident, so let me just fix that. So you just want to keep those eyes and Emily Head. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run optimize scene, and I'm also just going to check my shader here, and you can see I've got a ton of stuff in here that I don't want. So the first thing I'm going to do is just select everything. I'm going to assign back onto this the original Lambert. And this is always good when you get something new like this that has other stuff on it. This is a good way to clean it up. And then I'm going to delete unused nodes. In fact, all of these can go in the bin as well. So let's just make absolutely sure I've got everything. Select the eyes, and I'm just going to say select and select hierarchy, and again just make sure this is assigned to everything. So we should be in a good place. One more optimize just to make sure we're good. So we should now have a clean scene, and then I'm going to save this for you so you can now see kind of how I've got to this place. So let's go into Maya scenes. I'm just going to call this start here, head. Okay, so that potentially may be what you want to load. Now, obviously we're going to be using a subsurface scatter for this, and the size of the scene basically determines kind of the scale of the subsurface scatter. So if your head is twice as big, once we get into looking at the scale of the subsurface, you're going to want to make that bigger as well. But for what we're doing, we're just going to kind of try different things. Okay, so we're at a good place here. Now the first thing we want to do is just see if the subsurface is actually working. So I'm going to hide my eyes. So I'm going to do Control H, having selected them in the outliner. And I'm going to take my head, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to come down to Assign New Material. Now what I want to do is I want to assign a RenderMan Riss shader to this. Now we've talked a little bit about this, or I've mentioned it, the Riss. We also have Raise. Now Raise is the old system, render everything you ever saw. Riss is the new system that's come out with RenderMan 19 and RenderMan obviously 20. Moving on. Now we're not really going to talk about how this works. Christos, another FX PhD professor, has done numerous RenderMan classes that are absolutely superb, and in some of those he goes into a lot of detail about how Riss works, the difference between Riss and Raise. I'm going to assume that you've watched those classes or have figured it out yourself, or just don't need to know the backstory of all of that. and I'm just going to talk you through it. Okay, so just go through it as if you kind of know that information, because I don't want to repeat a lot of what Christos has said. But in amongst all this, we basically have a couple of things. We have base materials and materials. There's other things in here like patterns that we looked at earlier, but because we've chosen this as a new material, we're only going to see these. So I'm going to assign to the model a base material of the Pixar LMS subsurface. So that has now been assigned. If I come in and switch on my smooth, you can see we're getting something on there. And if we come across to here, here is our shader. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a light behind the ear, and then we're going to render this so we can actually begin to see what the subsurface looks like. So I'm going to come up and I'm going to choose this Create Geo Area Light. You could also come to RenderMan, and you can come to RMS, and you can choose lights here, and there's a RMS standard area light here. So I'm going to grab that. Now it's right in the middle, so if I move this back and over, there it is. I'm going to scale it up, and I'm going to also just come in and rotate it round, because you can see it has an arrow, it's facing the wrong way. So I'm going to hold down J, click and drag, and that will enable me to get it roughly in the right direction. I'm going to go with somewhere like that, and I'm just going to budge it over here. I kind of want it kind of behind the ear. Something like that should be fine. Okay, so we can see there's our light. Then going to just zoom in here. I want to be able to see kind of the back of the ear, because this is where we want to begin to make sure the subsurface is working. So I'm going to first of all come to RenderMan, IPR render, and click here. And this is going to bring up this IPR render options box. And what I've done here is I've said that the IPR is actually displaying or rendering to it. Now it is a RenderMan program that basically is a kind of a renderer, but you can also use it for viewing files. So it works as a kind of a file viewer plus the actual render window itself. If you don't want it, you can just say render view, and then when you use your IPR, it will just work like normal IPR. It'll open up your render window in Maya and just do the IPR in that. I quite like using it, so I'm going to do that. Also, if we come to the renderer and open its option box, you can see again I've got the display going to it here. Okay, so that's working. So I'm going to now come in here and I can click on this button, which is Start IPR. That takes a minute for it to load. Just popped up on my other monitor, but you can see there it is. You can see it's beginning to load and render. Now I've got a whole bunch of things here. I've got a catalog which shows me things that I've rendered in the past, and I've got an inspector here. I'm just going to budge these across a little bit to give us some space. Now what I want to do is I want to grab that light, and I'm going to begin to increase it. So I'm going to say exposure, let's say 10. You can see it immediately begins to kick into place, and we begin to see that really nice subsurface coming through. Now if we come back to the texture and come back to our shader, you can see that we have a number of things here that we're going to be using. We have the near, mid and far colors, and these define how the subsurface kind of works for the skin. And then we also have this unit length, and this is kind of a multiplier for the far length. Okay, so you can adjust these to kind of give you different amounts of light moving through the skin surface. Now I'm going to open up my channel box, and I want my attribute editor to be kind of pulled off, so I might just pull that off to the side. I can then have it open, and I can have this here, and I can kind of now adjust and see the difference. So you watch, if I now bring this down, 0.5. Do you see how now we're getting a lot less light moving through the actual ear itself? If I make it, say, 5, we're now getting a lot of light moving through. So it no longer really even looks like skin. It kind of looks weird and kind of waxy. So you need to basically adjust this until you're getting kind of the value that you think looks right. So just keep on pushing it back. And this is going to kind of be a personal thing. We're obviously trying to get this correct as far as we can see. Now you've got these colors. So you've got the near color, the mid color, and the far color. A lot of the information we're getting at the moment is through this far color. So if I come in and grab this and make it say blue, you see now that the whole inside of the ear, where that light is coming through the ear, it's now gone completely blue. If we come back to red, we're getting that really nice red color. If I come in, for instance, to the near color, let's make that say green. You can see now we're getting that green tinge really on the edges. You're not seeing it so much on the ear, but you're really seeing it kind of on the edge surface of the skin, where almost like the glancing angle. So again, I'm going to make that white. And then the mid color here, if we go ahead and say make that purple, you can see this is now kind of that mid layer between the outer skin and the kind of the deep skin or kind of fleshy area underneath the skin. So again, I'm going to just undo that back to this kind of default color that we're given here, this yellow color. Then we have obviously the weights and the length. So the weight is obviously how much it's being applied, and the length is how deep it's going. So you can see if we take, say, this far length, in fact, let's do it with the white one because that kind of is on this outer skin. So if I make the length not 0.8 but say 0.1, you can see the big difference that makes. And as I bring it down and begin to increase it upwards, you can see how that kind of slowly becomes more and more realistic. So 0.8 is actually a pretty good place for it to be. Somewhere around there. Looks a bit more realistic. Okay, so I'm just going to close down it. Got windows on top of windows, which is always the problem. And we know that that's working pretty nicely. We're getting some good results. Okay. Now you don't necessarily want this big light here all the time. What we may want instead is actually an HDR. So I'm going to come across to this one here, create environment light or daylight. We want the environment light. That makes our big kind of sphere. And we're just going to do this as a kind of a global HDR. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to grab my attribute editor, and in here the environment map, I'm going to go and choose one of those HDRs, and I might choose, say, let's go with the Pixar one. This is basically the Pixar website from there, and it's the entire kind of Pixar outer area, kind of like the front of their building. So let's move this down here and again do a render. We should really see what this looks like now coming through. So it takes a minute just to start up. And you can see, I just noticed down here we have this error, basically complaining about the fact that this is an EXR. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to convert this again to a TX file. So let's go ahead and do that. So again, I'm just going to come in and just open up my terminal. And I'm going to take that file. Now sometimes these EXRs do work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they run slowly, and that can be a real pain. So I definitely like to convert things. So let's go back to terminal. ls-l. There is the Pixar site. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say tx make -mode odic, and then I'm going to go PIX tab, and it finds it, PIX tab again, and just delete it from EXR to TX. Again, that's just going to run through. Once it's converted that, we should get our cursor back. So let's just open up this window. I should move it probably back to the main folder, but I'm just going to wait and just grab it off my desktop. I'll move it back for you in a moment. So you can see again, it takes a little bit of time just to go through. But once that's done, we will be able to use that. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to grab it, open. Just takes a little bit of time just to read that in. It's really quite a big file. And now when I go to render, you can actually see it in the viewport, which is great. So again, bring up the file viewer so I can see exactly what's rendering. And there we've got our initial model with the subsurface. Doesn't look so realistic at the moment, but we'll get there. One of the things I like to do is turn off primary visibility, and that basically just means, if I just go ahead and stop that and do a re-render on that, that basically just means that it will not show that primary visibility in the background. So I just get black. So we are now in a pretty good place. This is now, we've got our subsurface scatter working, we've got our HDR working. It's quite illuminated, probably a little bit too much for what we want, but it should be fine. What we're now missing is obviously the building of the shader itself. Now, looking at the time, we have actually gone through our lesson much quicker than I thought. So I'm actually going to leave the class here at this point, and we're going to get into the main shader builder next week in class number 8. Now, what I would recommend for homework this week would be for you to begin to play with RenderMan. This may be the first time you've used it. It's certainly the first time we've dealt with RenderMan in any of our fundamental classes. So what I would suggest you do is get familiar with how it works. Get familiar with some of the lights. So if we just stop this for a moment and we get rid of that. Get familiar rather with some of the lights here. So if I pull this off, it looks quite nice when you put it off. I'd never noticed that before. But you can see in here we have our standard area light. That's the one behind the ear. Have a play with that. We've also got your standard environment map light. That's the one we're using for the main HDR. Have a look at that as well. We have a mesh light and we have a daylight. So the top two definitely want to play with. Have a look at the actual material itself. So that's the actual subsurface scatter material. Make sure you're kind of familiar with some of the controls on that. And again, if I just open that up, try to get some of these things docked back in place is a nightmare. There we go. So have just a little play with these near, mid and far areas along with this unit length. That's going to be a good place for you to get started. And then what we're going to look at next week is actually tying in some of our textures into this. Now you may jump ahead and say, okay, I'm reasonably familiar with all this already. Let me start plugging in some of the textures. So if you want to do that and jump ahead, that's absolutely fine. You've got all the material now to do that. So that would be great for you to do between now and the next class. If you get through all that and you're still wanting to go further, what I would suggest you do is you actually look at some of the other shaders. So under here, you've got basically the Pixar LM materials. And if you right click, you can see you've got your diffuse glass, metal, plastic and subsurface. And then under here, you've got your Pixar Disney. And the Pixar Disney, think of that as kind of your like your mental ray material X. It kind of has everything in there. So have a little play with those as well. Just try different things just to experiment with RenderMan. If this is the first time, try making like a glass head or a chrome head or a plastic head, and you could render those out and put those on the forums just so I can see how you're getting on. And we'll then come back, as I said, next week, and we'll actually look in more depth at how we actually begin to assign these shaders and materials together to build up the look of this head. Okay, so until next week, any questions about what we've covered, which is in some way not a lot, but in other ways we've gone through terminal commands and make TX and a whole bunch of things that we needed to get through in order to get to this point. So any questions, as always, put them in the forums, and until next week, this has been Matt Leonard for FX PhD.